on that front, Pauline Hanson may have a valid point.
Okay.
That most economists, when you look at Australia, over the last decade, we've seen productivity growth slow to a crawl.
Oh, I got the Luke Bona blues.
It's been a little while since we've had the pleasure of having Shane Oliver, Chief Economist with AMP, on the program, but there's a lot to talk about today that involves each and every one of us, I'd say. Joins me now from his very modest palatial home on the Northern Beaches. Hello, brother. How are you?
Good Lord, Luke. Great to be back.
Good Lord, Shane Oliver. A fair bit to get through today. Look, I wanted to talk to you about the federal budget. We did talk about it just after it was delivered, but there's been some changes. And interesting to see today, Shane, that clearance rates around Australia, on average, have dropped below 50%. Now, what do you put this down to? And is it changes in the budget? Is it capital gains? Is it are buyers being more wary about the market at the moment? What do you put this down to? You've seen the figures. They were published in today's Australian Financial Review.
Look, those figures are definitely weak. I wouldn't say they're catastrophic. I actually put out a little tweet or an X post Saturday nights, which had the clearances in there. And to me, it's just bouncing along it's hit the bottom of the range that it's normally in. Now, of course, at the time of the pandemic, it went a lot lower. But so you could argue, as the housing minister did last week, that it's just a normal cyclical correction.
Right.
Nothing unusual. Only problem is that it's early days yet. Could go for a while further. I think the property market's been hit by a bit of a perfect storm, to be honest with you. We had huge gains into last year, and that led to very poor affordability or very high house price to income ratios. Then, of course, we started to see the interest rate story went from there's going to be two or three more cuts in August. By the end of the year, that's gone back to, well, it looks like there's going to be hikes. And then, of course, we've already seen three of them this year. So the clearance rate actually peaked, I think, around October, November last year, and then a bit of bounce, and it's way down. So it peaked up around, I think, 75. So we're now down around or below 50. So quite a sharp fall, but I think a lot of that was the change in the interest rate story. Then, of course, we had the war come along and that hit confidence. Whether the war's over or not is debatable. We can debate that one until the cow comes home, given the news out of the Middle East. But that hit confidence. But I think the big factor, of course, has then been the changes in negative gearing, capital gains tax. Mm-hmm. And if you're of the view that those things inflated prices, then you'd also have to be of the view that if you take those concessions away or substantially curtail them, which is what's happened here, then they will deflate prices. And that makes logical sense because investors have seen their after-tax rate of return change because the capital gains tax arrangements won't be as generous as they used to be, and new investors in newly purchased property won't get negative gearing. Yeah. So they're demanding, logic for an investor is to say, well, I'll only get in if I get a lower price than previously, or higher rents, or some combination of the two. I want a higher rental yield up front. And so investors are holding back. So you've got this combo of high interest rates, poor confidence, poor affordability, and now the tax changes. They're all coming together. We've got a perfect storm out there pushing the property market down. As I said, so far it just looks like a normal cyclical correction. But of course, it's early days yet. I think this will go on for a while yet. And then we could see more weakness down the track. But it's all, of course, being associated with falling prices, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, and in the boom time cities, Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth, they're all slowing down.
Okay, so these are you think these are investors that are just backing off. The incentive isn't there with capital gains unless, of course, they buy a newly built home. So investors are backed off. The reserve price hasn't been reached. They're passed in. This is what I assume. So will the vendors and the agents then say, well, hang on, we're going to meet this new market? Won't that bring prices down, and wouldn't that be good news for first home buyers?
Oh, it would be, Luke. Yeah, it would be. That's, I guess, what the government's been aiming to do with all of this, get the prices down, create a window of opportunity for first home buyers to get into the market at a somewhat lower price. And of course, vendors, when I look at the auction clearance figures, they also show the listings and the sales, and the listings are down on a year ago. So at the moment, the vendors are hanging back. It looks like they're not in a hurry to sell. If you're an investor, you've already got a negatively geared property. You don't want to sell that because the next one you buy won't be negatively geared. And if you're an owner-occupier, you're thinking, well, if I sold a few months ago, I could have got a much better price. Now I'm going to get a lower price. I'll just hang on to my property. So vendors at present aren't selling. That may change, but whatever it is, there are less buyers there and some vendors are lowering their prices. And so prices have come down. And yes, that does provide an opportunity for first-home buyers. The question is whether it's enough. I've had chats with my kids are Gen Z and millennial, and one's in favour of the tax changes, another one's not. They think another one I was having a chat with the cafe millennial was saying, well, this is a bit like you guys, you older guys, you and me, pulling the ladder up. You've got the benefit of these things. Your generation's got the benefit. You're now pulling the ladder up, so we can't generate wealth to the same degree you did. That's unfair. Others say, well, no, these tax arrangements were inflating property prices, so good to see it go. So there's mixed views on all of that. The other thing is that I don't think the real issue in Australia is negative gearing capital gains tax. I think the real issue as to why we have unaffordable property is that we haven't been building enough homes for the number of people that are here. Right. So there's been constraints on supply for all sorts of things, reasons that we talked about, shortage of tradies.
Immigration always comes up.
But it's mathematical. If you put more people into a place and they all want a house, but you don't build more houses, then the prices go up. So immigration levels got out of balance. I think immigration is great for Australia, but it got out of balance in the last few years. And for the last 20 years now, there hasn't been enough supply in the property market generally for the last 20 years. So this has been an issue. This poor affordability issue has been an issue, I think, since the middle part of last decade. So all those things are playing into it. And fundamental, if you don't fix them up, you can get a bit of relief in the short term as prices come down, as investors hold back, but eventually the underlying supply shortfall will still remain. And there's a danger, of course, that there'll be less investors in the market, therefore ultimately less supply. And Treasury has estimated that as a result of their changes, there'll be 35,000 less dwellings constructed over the next decade as a result of the investment tax changes. Now, the flip side is they also say, well, we're going to be 60,000 more from the $2 billion we put in to speed up infrastructure construction. But that's all a bit iffy, as to whether that'll work or not. But generally speaking, I think less investors in the market overall, even though they could still get a negative gearing benefit on a brand new property.
Yes.
Less investors overall probably means less supply over the longer term. So that's a bit of a drag, and that's why we've been going in circles on this issue as a country, debating it for the last 7 weeks. It's unclear as to whether it fixes the problem in the long term. It may give you a short-term boost. Yes, prices come down, first-home buyers get a window, but is that going to be enough longer term?
There's been a lot of talk lately about the backflip on the widow tax. Now, can you explain what that tax was or is and how it affects us?
Well, that seemed to be one that only got discovered last week, or I started reading about it last week. It was initially called a death tax, and they changed that. So the death tax aspect of it was the trusts, family trusts, and they included testamentary trusts. Now that's been removed, and so they've solved the death tax issue. But then last week it was realised that if you have an existing rental property that is negatively geared, you can keep that. It's owned by two people, say a husband and a wife. One of them dies, then immediately the ownership of that property changes and it loses the negative gearing benefit. That's seen as somewhat unfair. How can this possibly be? And so that's why they call it a widow's tax. The surviving partner will end up with a less favourable taxation outcome.
And they call it a widow's tax. They don't call it a widower's tax. So they're assuming the bloke's going to go first. Yeah, I know. I just thought I'd point that out. Anyway, keep going.
But then the government has said they'll fix that. Well, that's right. I last saw that the government said they'll fix that up, but it might not be till the second round of tax goes at this. So basically, this is passed through Parliament. The tax changes are passed through Parliament, and those tax changes that pass through include the negative gearing, capital gains tax change, and the trusts. They did fix up the death tax aspect on trusts. The negative gearing still stays the same at capital gains tax. They made some changes to make it a little bit more amenable for small business and startups, although there's still a lot of debate about that, whether it's going to be enough. They also changed last week at the behest of the Greens, the ability of separately managed super fund. This is where you manage your own super fund. You used to be able to borrow into that fund and then buy property. So that was seen as a backdoor way to get into the property market. the Greens insisted that that be changed, and therefore super funds that you run yourself, you can't no longer borrow to buy into property. So that's been banned. So all those changes have gone through. I guess the widow tax still has to be fixed up, although they say they're going to. The thing about all of this, I find, is that we still don't know whether we're actually going to solve the problem in the housing market. So that was the issue we're just talking about. I don't think it really fixes the issues up for innovative startups. The rules to get capital gains tax relief on that, the 50% discount, I think are overly complicated. And the other issue I find is that we've gone through all of this. We should have had a budget, I think, that should have been focused on boosting productivity. There was a bit of deregulation in the budget. In the end, we as a nation have gone down this rabbit hole debating some bits of the tax system, but not the critically important bits of the tax system that need to be fixed up. It's a bit of a wasted opportunity, I kind of think. The underlying tax system is still as messed up as it was. We don't rely enough on GST. We rely too much on income tax. We still have bracket creep. We still have stamp duty. All those big issues, they're all still there. They haven't been resolved, even though we've been having this pitch debate for the last almost 2 months now. That worries me a little bit. It depresses me a little bit. So it kind of looks like it was just a revenue-raising exercise at the end of the day, and we haven't seen any benefits from that in terms of offsetting tax cuts.
Do you think it's a wise decision to borrow from your super to buy an investment property? I was having an interesting discussion with Scotty Phillips about this, and he's concerned that debt inside an SMSF adds risk that super shouldn't be taking. The other thing is, should housing be for shelter first and investment second?
In terms of the first issue, no, I don't think a super fund should be able to borrow to buy property.
Right, you're in agreement with him there, right?
I totally agree with Scotty Phillips there. And it's just worth noting that other funds that you may be in or I might be in, they can't borrow. So it seems an inequity that an SMSF, a separately managed super fund run by yourself, can borrow to buy property, but a regular super fund can't. It was always the nature of super when it was set up that it can't be geared and can't take excessive risks.
But can't I cash in my super? Okay, I got a fair whack of super. Can't I say, okay, I'm going to take it away from whoever, you know who it is, but can I take it away, put it in my bank account and spend it how I want?
Well, you can. Of course you can. That's up to you once you do that. And you can borrow money against it and buy investment property if you want. You can do whatever. I think when super was originally set up, it didn't want to be seen as a highly speculative thing, taking lots of highly geared risks. But for some reason, the ability of your individual super funds to do that was allowed. It's only a certain sort of borrowing. I think it's called limited recourse borrowing or something like that. So the idea is the super fund borrows, but if the property fails and they can't meet the payments on it, the lender does not have recourse to go after the other assets in the super fund. But still, you could have a huge exposure in your SMSF to property, which leads to a lack of diversification. And that particular property may have an issue with it, fall in value, and then that adversely affects your super, and then you're back getting the pension.
And then you're back on the pension. Exactly. I've got to keep moving. I had Pauline Hanson on the podcast last week, and I had limited time to.
Good interview. Yeah.
Thank you. But I wanted to talk to her about this, but you heard the interview. There were other things to talk about. But this one, I want your opinion on. That press club speech that she gave, there were a number of things in there, and it's going to take us a while to get through them. But here's one in particular. Her stance on paid parental leave. And it has sparked massive debate following that address at the National Press Club. She's questioned why employers should have to fund maternity leave, but later walked back on her comments and clarified that she supports taxpayer-funded government PPL. But she questioned why businesses should pay wages to women on maternity leave. She claimed, quote, if women take time off and they are not paid their wages because they're not working, fair enough. Why should businesses pay? But they're not at work. That's why the pay gap is there. Your thoughts?
I think the pay gap reflects a lot more than that. Good news is the pay gap's come down over the last 50 years. I've got some data on that, and back in the 70s, the pay gap was something close to 40%. Now it's on just average full-time earnings. It's down to around 13%, I think it is. Yeah, 13%. Come from almost 40% down to 13%. So it has improved dramatically. Part of the reason was that women take time out to raise a family, to have children, particularly through the pregnancy phase, and that often sets them back relative to men. And so as a result, you go back to when I started in certain companies. Once you announce you were
1978, 79?
Yeah, in certain companies, once you announce as a woman you're pregnant, you then have to resign from the company
Or sometimes even when you got married.
Yes, it does. When you got married, and then that sets you back. When you want to come back into your career, you're then set back, and you have to start all over again. If you had a good employer, you might go back to the old one, the same one, and fair enough. But often, most of the time, that didn't happen. Each time you're doing this, you're starting behind where your male counterparts would have been, and then therefore you ended up with this bigger pay gap. Over the years, those rules have been removed and changed, and companies have got with the times and treated men and women equally. They don't have to resign if they get paid. A lot of companies are already offering paid parental leave, quite generous arrangements. The federal government's decided, well, that's a reasonable thing to do. And as a result, that's where we've got to as a society. We've got to that point, which I think partly helps address the gender pay gap. I think to remove that would be a backward step, and I'm not a great fan of that. I think that would see the gender pay gap go back the other way when the aim is to try and reduce it. The reason a company might logically do that anyway, even if the government didn't request this, was that you want to maintain a good workforce. You offer paid parental leave. The odds are your employees will regard you highly and they'll work hard for you and they'll be incentivized. They said, this company's treating us pretty well, and now we'll come back once we've had the child. So I think it makes sense from a corporate point of view as well as from a societal point of view.
Senator Hanson also claims that Australian businesses' hands are tied and lazy workers can't get sacked. You would have heard that.
There are issues there.
She called for a complete overhaul of Australia's industrial relation laws. Some small business leaders and employment lawyers have disputed the One Nation leader's claims that workplaces cannot sack people these days. But she says more business owners come up to her and say, I can't sack this person. They're on their phone all day. They're playing games on the computer. They're lazy, but I can't sack them. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I'm not in a position to sort of say whether this is a big problem or not, but my understanding is that it has become harder. It's also the case that the Fair Work Commission, I think, is inundated with wrongful dismissal claims, that a company might sack someone for doing the wrong thing and they might have good reason to do it, but then they can be hit with a wrongful dismissal claim, and the Fair Work Commission's been overwhelmed with these claims these days. So there are issues there, and this is partly goes back to, we went through a long phase of labour market deregulation, starting with Hawke and Keating, and continued, some would say went too far with the work choices arrangements under Howard and Costello. But anyway, that was wheeled back a little bit. But then we've kept going back, and the current government has imposed a lot of extra regulations around employing people, which has reduced their flexibility and could be a bigger problem. And I think on that front, Pauline Hanson may have a valid point. That most economists, when you look at Australia, over the last decade, we've seen productivity growth slow to a crawl. Productivity growth, that's producing more for the same number of hours worked, is the way we grow our living standards on a long-term basis. And over the last decade, it's come to a crawl. And therefore, it could be a factor. When we complain about the cost of living and wages not keeping up, one of the reasons is lack of productivity growth. One of the reasons behind that is a labour market that's become far less flexible.
Let's just have a listen to what Pauline Hanson said about lazy workers and not being able to sack them. Let's have a listen.
Industrial relations, I can assure you, needs a complete overhaul because it's not working. Businesses also tell me you can't sack people these days. They're on their phones, they don't work, they don't turn up. Is it really working for small businesses out there, industries, manufacturing? And I was speaking to one business person, he said the latest increase is going to cost him $50,000 for his business. And he said, I've got to find $100,000 to pay that. He said, I'm going to have to let people go. So it is a great concern. You need to look at the other side of the ledger. Can businesses afford and pay that? I understand there is a struggle that is happening in people being able to afford and pay their bills, but there has to be a balance.
Finally, Shane Oliver. Interesting figures out today, also in the Fin Review. The average cost of a wedding. You ready for this? You ready for this?
It's going to be more than one. I had one.
How old are your kids?
Well, that's the problem. I don't know if you're thinking of my wedding, but my kids are now, 24, 27, almost 28. So
married?
No, but they've got steady relationships.
Steady partners. Okay, this might cost you if you're traditional. The average cost of a wedding in New South Wales, including the Sydney and Warriewood regions. These are figures out today, also in the Fin. It's roughly $40,000.
Yeah, that's amazing.
38,000 to 41, which, while as a common national benchmark, prices scale quickly depending on guest count and desired styling. Venue and catering, 15 to 20,000. Do you know what the average price per head of a guest at a wedding is? Between 150 to 225 per guest.
Yeah, God.
Photography and videography between 3,000 and 6,000. Dress, groomswear, the matrons of honour, the bridesmaids, all of that between 3,000 and 5,000. Florals and styling between 2,000 and 5,000. I'm going on here. The celebrant can cost between 1,000 and 3,000. Average price of a wedding about $40,000. Is it, Shane Oliver, as an economist, is it money well spent? Or should you put it into a high interest bearing bank account and that $40,000 over 2 years might get you $2,000? Or are you better off putting it towards deposit on a flat?
Well, this is like one of those loaded questions amongst
I know, that's what I do.
boomers, where the baby boomer asked the question, says, no, it's not good value. You should be putting it towards the home. It's an example of spending too much money on smashed avocado and rye bread. The chai tea,
the chai tea, exactly.
So, look, I think this is an indication of, because I love chai tea.
I do too. Yeah, I have the chai tea bags, the brown ones.
You have the tea bags. No,
it's chai tea in a tea bag. Yeah. Anyway, please go on.
We're going for distraction here. It's funny when you go overseas. I go to cafes overseas. Can I have chai tea, please? You got sticky chai or prana chai, and none of them have it. They don't have it. And you come back to Australia and think, gee, this is a good country. We've got all this stuff. But anyway, I think it's an example where expectations have increased dramatically. I mean, everyone wants to have a great wedding. There's no doubt about this. Maybe I'm saying this as a father who might have children getting married soon and don't want to spend too much money, but we'll all have that debate, as the people getting married these days have that debate. But I mean, of course, you want to have the best wedding, but these costs have gone up, and there are examples of how people, I guess, expect better things these days. Expect better venues, expect someone to show up at the venue providing the music, the celebrant, and all these sorts of things. Whereas in the old days, you didn't have that. You just get a priest and make a donation to the church. So it is an example of how things have changed. And it does make it harder, of course, for young people, I guess, if you are getting into a property, to do that. But I guess as an economist, I would also say it's a matter of preference. Whatever floats your boat, so to say. So it's up to individuals to decide, what they want to do on this. And if this is what you want to do, then that's fair enough, and that makes you happy. Then that's the way to do it. But just bear in mind that there are trade-offs here. If you're going to spend $40,000 up front on that, you could have spent that $40,000 towards a deposit on a house.
And in this day and age, is it still traditional that the father of the bride pays for everything and the father of the groom pays for the grog? That's the way it used to be. That's the way it used to be.
That's right. My understanding is that it is, but it's softened a little bit around the edges, I think. Yeah, I mean, that rule was always a bit sad. And it's a very sexist rule because it sort of implies...
Well, it was like the old dowry system, wasn't it?
It is an old dowry system that you've got to pay for something to offload your daughter.
Offload your daughter.
I think that's terrible. We talk about Sharia law in Australia. I don't think really there is Sharia law in Australia, and I agree with you in your line of questioning on that one, that you have to obey the rules of the law in the laws of the land, and so therefore you can't have Sharia law in Australia. But that is an example. This old idea where the father or the family of the bride would pay the full cost does emanate from something which is very, very sexist. So I would prefer to see that one go. I think it should be split if possible.
When we went to India, we saw a lot of Indian weddings. And the dowry system there is alive and well, and particularly the arranged marriages, or there are love marriages and there are arranged marriages. That system is still going. So, and you remember the days when your bride, what year did you get married?
95.
Oh, you're a bit late. My first was 1982. I was 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
It did start early.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I'm 2-0 at the moment, and the current one I'm with won't do it, and I totally understand. But back in the day, and you had the girl stayed at home with her parents until her wedding night. And she had, what was it called, a glory box? It was a box where she would save things, pillow slips, Manchester, knives and forks, plates. Do you remember that? Was it called? That wasn't a glory box. What was it called? You remember
I don't know. It's a bit before my time. It didn't happen in my case.
A diary box. So it's called something. And you got married from home, and your first night with your husband was on your wedding night.
There you go.
Those days are gone, aren't they?
They are. Well, good. I mean, some aspects of those things weren't so good.
Now, how many of your kids are girls?
A boy and a girl.
You got a boy and a... Yeah.
First is a girl, and then the second is a boy.
So the girl is how old? 28.
Well, she's coming up for 28 in
28
in August, I think. We're both Leos.
Yeah. So what are you, August?
August, yeah.
Yeah, see, how good was that? You might be up for a bit of a spend of some serious folding. So the bloke that she's with, is he a good boy? Do you approve?
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Okay. Oh,
I shouldn't say this. Well, I'm not going to say he's a bad guy on the podcast. You might hear it, but no, he is a really good guy. I like him.
that's very good. Well, you're very, very lucky. All right. Hey, listen, how many more interest rate hikes this year?
I reckon one, possibly two. Look, I don't like to say this because it is rough for people with a mortgage, and I say this with a degree of apprehension because I know it will upset many people. But I think the problem is we do have an inflation problem in Australia. I mean, I get a letter in the mail and someone says the price has gone up. I've got to get my hair cut, and there's a little sign there saying our costs have gone up, so we're going to have to raise the cost of getting a haircut by 10%. We've become a bit inflation prone. I know where that led to in the 70s, and then it got really hard to get it back down again in the 80s. That's what many of us are complaining about. We're not complaining about unemployment. We're complaining about the cost of living going up and up and up and up. Therefore, I think the Reserve Bank probably does have to act a little bit more to bring it back down. I mean, this is the thing. The last inflation numbers we got had good news and bad news. The good news is the headline rate went down from 4.2, I think, to 4% because of lower fuel prices. So great, fantastic. I filled up at $1.47 on the weekend. That's even better. So maybe it'll come down a bit more. But the flip side is that the underlying rate of inflation, the trim mean, which strips out all these volatile things like fruit and veggie prices and of course fuel prices, it rose to 3.6%. So it's still going the wrong way. And most of us are experiencing that with rises in our cost of living and wages aren't keeping up. That's a problem. I think it's another big problem. Part of the problem is excessively expensive housing. But bottom line is I think the Reserve Bank probably has to raise rates more. Would have been nice to see the budget take a little bit of pressure off, cut back government spending a bit more, but we didn't see enough of that in the budget. Unfortunately, most of the spending cutbacks are 2 or 3 years down the track.
Shane Oliver, always good to talk to you. You take care of yourself. You could have a big wedding just around the corner.
You're getting me worried now.
Oh, I got the Luke Bona blues.